I've been on an N64 kick as of late, so when I was sifting through my games to figure out what I wanted to play, I came across something I've been meaning to get to for a really long time. Paper Mario. But then I realized there was no way I could finish that in time for this week, so I decided to switch gears a bit. At the bottom of the heap of games was Cruisin' USA, one of my favorite racing games as a kid. Now let me make one thing clear. Nostalgia is a real thing, but I do my best not to let it influence me when I make videos. I come into every one of these with an open mind whether I played it once or 1,000 times. It would be irresponsible of me to put out a rose-colored glasses kind of review because if you went out and purchased a game based off something I, a stranger on the internet, said, you likely wouldn't have a good experience, and you'd likely hate me, and I wouldn't want that. It's been a very long time since I've played Cruisin' USA, but holding the cartridge in my hand made the memories come rushing back. Cruising down the street in my bootlegger jalopy, crashing into a tree in Redwood Forest, running over stupid people standing in the road at the finish line. I figured it would make for a good little video because it's not terribly long and I knew how I felt about it for the most part. But one thing nagged at me. A few months ago I saw a tweet referencing the game and its negative reputation, which was shocking to me. I started looking at reviews from the time, and yeah, Cruisin' USA was universally panned for a variety of reasons, from alleged frame rate issues to collision detection problems. A lot of this criticism seems to stem from the fact that this was one of the earliest racing games on the N64 and the bar was set really high, especially since it was a port of a proper arcade racing game. Weirdly enough, the arcade version was advertised to be running on Ultra 64 hardware, but it wasn't. So I would imagine that also didn't help considering the graphical dip was noticeable given that the N64 was never going to be capable enough to have that kind of graphical output. Cruisin' USA desperately needed to make a splash because competing hardware already had competent racers gracing them like Wipeout and Ridge Racer Revolution. With that much pressure riding on it, of course Cruisin' USA didn't set the world on fire. Even as a defender of this game, I can understand why it didn't live up to the expectations. It was never going to. But even after 25 years, the deeply negative reputation seems to have followed this game without any signs of letting up, and to me that doesn't seem fair. Here's why. Cruisin' USA is a goofy port of an arcade racer that takes you on a cross-country cannonball run of a semi-fictional version of the United States of America. It might not become your next favorite game, but there's still fun to be had with it if you haven't played it yet. To me, it's just so much better than its reputation would say. Now, if you've played it and don't like it, that's fine, this isn't supposed to change your mind, but rather explain why you should give it a chance if you haven't because of what you've read about it. Cruisin' USA is in the category of arcade racers that I like to call treadmill racers, where there is a feel of your car remaining stagnant while the environment comes at you. There's no backward, only forward. A more recent example of this kind of game is Horizon Chase Turbo. Frankly, I'm not a fan of this kind of racing game most of the time because your movement has a tendency to feel really limited and tracks can feel really flat. In my experience, these games get repetitive because of how flat they are, but if you have any recommendations that could change my mind, please leave them in the comments down below. In spite of how I feel about this kind of racing game, Cruisin' USA feels like there's variety and elevation where it makes sense, like San Francisco has hills for instance. Since you're traveling across the USA, there is little repetition in scenery and tracks. From Beverly Hills to Washington, D.C., there were some very fun creative liberties taken in between. You can drive on the road that definitely doesn't exist in the Grand Canyon.
So this is the Grand Canyon?
No, it isn't. In the same breath, you exit the Grand Canyon and immediately pass Mount Rushmore, which according to Google Maps is like 2 days worth of driving apart from one another. That made me laugh a little bit harder than I anticipated, not gonna lie. And it's not just tracks, it's other little touches too. The hovering digitized woman who raises the flag before races, and the farm on top of the White House where your car rotates after you win is just so strange, it's really fun. Those kind of design choices are part of why I like this game so much. It's just kind of funny and janky, which, given how the series ultimately turned out, is definitely deliberate. I mean, Cruisin' Exotica had you racing underwater for crying out loud. This was never supposed to be a game you took seriously. Maybe that's part of the reason I don't really care how derpy crashing looks, which, once you get used to the controls, rarely happens anyway. And if you find yourself in an unlucky string of crashes, it's hardly a death sentence anyway. This game is pretty forgiving in that regard. I seem to be in the minority of people who thinks the snappy, responsive, turn-on-a-dime controls is very satisfying to use. You can avoid rogue drunk drivers with ease, even at the last second, given how sensitive the control stick is. I definitely did suffer from some of the collision detection issues mentioned in the reviews, but once I started passing cars wide instead of squeezing in between them, I rarely crashed again. That doesn't mean collision detection problems aren't there, I just mean they aren't a game-breaking mess in my opinion. Frame rate issues plagued many different games on the N64, and that's really no secret. The worst issues in Cruisin' USA seem to be where a lot is happening on screen, like where you're driving through San Francisco and you got the buildings flying at you, or passing through the tunnel made of money in DC. It's more noticeable if you're looking for it, but again, I don't think it's as miserable as other games on the system. I personally really like the music in Cruisin' USA, in spite of there being a limited number of songs in the game. The upbeat, weird guitar music just pairs well with the cross-country trip tone. Of course, a lot of that comes down to personal preference, so it might not be for everyone. Overall, I think Cruisin' USA is a solid game that suffered from a hype cycle and the impossible task of being a third-party game trying to put the N64 on the map for racing games. It isn't the greatest game on the planet or probably even in the entire Cruisin' series, but it is a good time. It's solid, and if you haven't given it a chance, you should. The last thing I'll bring up is price, because I think that too had a factor in these things as well. In 2020, you can find a complete in-box copy of this game for less than $20, something I'm tempted to do, honestly. But in 1995, this game retailed for $70, or $118 in 2020. That's nuts. Through that lens, I totally understand where the hate came from. But in our current day, I think it's time to forgive Cruisin' USA for costing a lot when it came out and look at it for what it is. I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like on it. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave them in the comments down below. Have you played Cruisin' USA? Did you love this game, hate this game, whatever? Let me know in the comments down below. And lastly, if you really like this video, you should consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. I'm putting out content pretty consistently these days, so lots of stuff is coming down the pipe. But until next time, I've been Under 10 Hours. See you next time.